Segment 5, From Theory to Practice. Charlie Hill writing in 2007, quote, this is not in this book, but we're coming back to the book, quote, nothing has been more dispiriting in the nearly 2 decades since the end of the Cold War than the ineptitude and lack of purpose in the conduct of American foreign policy. As Casey Stengel said, can't anybody here play this game? If only it were a game. 2 decades. You're writing in 2007, so that takes in George H.W. Bush, President Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama hadn't been elected at that point. You really want to use the word ineptitude and level that against all those characters?
Well, that is kind of harsh, but I think
You feel no impulse to back down, though. I can see that.
It comes with the end of the Cold War. The Cold War, and you can see this in the documentary of George Shultz as Ronald Reagan, Secretary of State, that's being shown.
Airing this summer.
This is something where you see high purpose. And there's something in that documentary that does give you the sense of many different things coming to bear on a decision. And they know what they're doing. They know that they're fighting for democracy and freedom. They have a purpose there.
You do have such a... I was a kid in those days, of course, in the speechwriting shop, but looking back on it, by comparison with what has happened since, I'm offering this to you to see if you have the same sense of it, but one does have... Cap Weinberger and George Shultz were fighting all the time. Ronald Reagan spent most of his life as an actor, and yet you look at them all and you have the sense that they were grown-ups. These were fully formed adults infused with a sense of purpose who knew what they were doing. Do you not have that sense?
Yes, and it's because they saw things in the entirety or close to it. They saw, it used to be the case that when the alarm bell rang in the operations center of the State Department, it might be a coup d'etat in the Seychelles. Right. So we say, well, who cares about that? But everything mattered. They saw the connections. With the end of the Cold War, it became partial. It became demarcated. President Clinton, I think understandably, thought that he had been elected to be a domestic agenda president. And so what he was doing, certainly in the first term of the Clinton administration, was trying to get foreign policy problems off his back so he could devote himself to the domestic agenda. And so just get through the news cycle and we'll then go back to healthcare or whatever. And that began a process, although I think it was before that. It was earlier, and Bush 41 was touched by that too. You do things in sort of one side of an issue. You don't think of the whole thing because the tensions weren't there. The feeling was not there that there's a real danger out there that is of great magnitude. Only in the last decade or 7 or 8 years have we begun, or some of us begun, to sense the magnitude of that danger again because of the rise of Islamism. Because as in the Cold War, where communism was opposed, here we go back to Westphalia, communism was opposed to every one of those procedural elements. The state had to be destroyed, smashed. International law was a tool of the bourgeois capitalist classes. Human rights was a farce. Against all of that, the communist ideology, which was a religion in effect, was we will destabilize the international system, we'll overthrow it, and we'll replace it. That's the same agenda that the Islamists have. So in some sense, the 1990s were a lost decade where we didn't understand the problem. Today, I think more people do understand it, but not Washington yet.
Charlie, you close Grand Strategies with an observation from Henry Kissinger, suggesting that the world in which we live, modern technology, but the whole mode of consciousness in which we live, is a problem. Let me quote you quoting Henry Kissinger. Information is not knowledge. People these days are not readers, but researchers. They float on the surface. This new thinking erases context. It disaggregates everything. All this makes strategic thinking about world order nearly impossible to achieve. You write about universities banishing true literature and the deeper understanding and the large narrative sweep of history. You close with Henry Kissinger saying, we are raising students not to understand, but to react, to float. Do you see grand strategies? Do you see yourself? Is this an elegy? Are you a champion for a lost cause? Mm-hmm. Or do you truly believe there's an opportunity here for a genuine restoration?
I think the opportunity for a restoration is there if we understand what's happening to us, what is going on. And Henry Kissinger grasped that. And I got a better sense of this by writing the book, because as I was doing it, I began in the writing of it to see connections across a kind of a conversation from one literary work to another and back and forth, that there were things going on here that were part of a long, involved, complicated, but rich intellectual conception, which is what a book is. And that's what Kissinger was referring to. When you have a book, you've got to stick with it. You can't grasp it all in one little piece. You've got to keep it in your mind and struggle with it and grapple with it, wrestling with the angel in order to come away with something that's enriching. And that is something in the intellectual tradition that we inherit, that if we lose that, it's going to be disastrous.
Give us 2 or 3 books that President Obama should read this summer.
Grand Strategies.
All right. That's a gimme. Now give me 2 or 3
more. The
more.
Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. I think the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid, because it seems to me that President Obama is kind of like Aeneas. Aeneas kind of wanders around and things happen to him. He doesn't make things happen. He pulls away.
He's the Roman Zelig.
Yes, we saw in the prisoner swap with Russia, I was watching Rem Emanuel on television trying to convince the interviewer that the president had nothing to do with the swap, that this was decided automatically by other entities of the government, by law enforcement, and the president was briefed on this. He was kept briefed. And I recalled the last prisoner swap, which they had referred to on the same show, and that was back in 1986 or 87 on the Galanica Bridge. That was where Sharansky came out, and how George Shultz had gone to the president and struggled back and forth about this, with the president saying, I don't think we ought to do this. Well, eventually the president said, okay, but it was completely a presidential decision. And that contrast was enormous. So that's an Aeneid kind of thing. Eventually, Aeneas gets it. He never quite knows what his real mission is. He thinks he knows, but he doesn't know. He has to go to hell to find out. And when he's in hell, his father, who's a shade there, tells him what his mission is. But what we hope is that President Obama doesn't have to go to hell before he figures it out.
Ambassador Charles Hill, author of Grand Strategies, Literature, Statecraft, and World Order. I also think a little soulcraft in there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm Peter Robinson. On behalf of Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution, thanks for joining us.